The chill wasn't just in the warehouse air. It was a blade sliding down his spine. 10 years. 10 years of salt-laced wind and the hollow echo of his own footsteps across the decks of tankers. All to get him back to this. Back to the rusted, echoing cavity of Pier 14, where the city forgot its secrets. He moved low, a phantom stitched from the shadows between towering stacks of shipping containers. The air smelled of brine, diesel, and a metallic tang that always meant trouble. Elias wore his 10 years like armor, a hardened set to his jaw, eyes that saw in the dark. A worn leather jacket that hid the weight of a customized Walther PPK. His father's gun, the one he'd buried, then dug up the moment the news had reached him in Rotterdam. If you're ready for the shadows to pay their debts, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next move. Tonight wasn't about justice. Justice was a word the rich used to clean up their messes. Tonight was about reckoning. About the man who took everything. His family's shipping empire, their name, and finally, his father's life. A carefully staged accident they called a dock crane failure. His name was Marcus Vane, and he was inside that warehouse, hosting a high-stakes, off-the-books auction. Elias flattened himself behind a massive crate labeled Fragile Artworks. Iron grating ran high above, and through the dust-streaked windows, weak moonlight cut the interior into stark lines. A single door, reinforced steel, marked the entrance to Vane's temporary lair. 2 guards, hulking men in black, stood sentinel, their postures bored, their rifles anything but. Bored yet, Frank? One guard muttered, adjusting the sling of his weapon. 7 minutes passed profitable, the other, Frank, grunted back. Vane and his collectors, always so dramatic. Elias knew the timing. Vane liked to begin his auctions at midnight, the witching hour for bad deals. It was 11:54 p.m. 6 minutes. Too long to wait for a clear shot. Too short to find another way in. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, heavy ball of thermite putty, a gift from a forgotten friend in the Black Sea. Frank shifted his weight, momentarily bringing his back almost flush with the steel door. Elias took the chance. With a practiced snap of his wrist, he tossed the putty. It arced silent and low, sticking to the upper hinge of the door Frank was not looking at. Then, a silent click of the remote detonator on his belt. The resulting sound wasn't an explosion. It was a furious, hissing burn. A white-hot plume of fire the size of a fist tore through the steel hinge in a shower of brilliant orange sparks and smoke. Frank wheeled around, eyes wide. Wah! Elias was already moving. He sprinted the 10 feet toward the door, low and fast, his Walther already drawn and cocked. The second guard was slower, trying to raise his rifle. Mistake. Elias didn't even slow down. He fired one shot, not at the guard, but at the overhead chain holding a utility light. His senses scrambled by the impossible heat and blinding light flash. Elias hit him with a devastating crossbody tackle, driving him into the wall with a hollow thud. Frank's head snapped back, the rifle clattered away. The first guard, dazed, was still searching the gloom for a target. Elias rolled off Frank, his focus laser-sharp. He kicked the downed rifle away, then drove the butt of his pistol hard into Frank's temple. Lights out. He moved to the steel door. The top hinge was a molten smear, but the bottom still held. He kicked it, once, twice, putting all his weight and fury into the strike. The door groaned, the bottom bolts shearing with a shriek of tortured metal. It swung inward a crack, revealing a sliver of warm, golden light and the distant murmur of voices. He crouched, listening. The sounds were muffled, no immediate panic. The guards outside were far enough from the main warehouse to miss the scuffle over the auction chatter. He slipped through the gap, the scent of expensive cigar smoke and old money hitting him immediately. The warehouse floor gave way to a plush, improvised viewing area. Velvet drapes covered the ugly concrete walls. Crystal glasses sat on mahogany tables. A small stage was set up at the far end, bathed in a spotlight. And there he was, Marcus Vane, older, heavier, but with the same cold, calculating eyes. He stood next to a pedestal, gesturing with an open palm toward the object of the auction. A small, dark wooden treasure chest, supposedly recovered from an old Spanish galleon. A meaningless trinket to Elias, but a source of profit to Vane. Vane was mid-speech, his voice a smooth, confident purr through the PA system. A piece that represents not just history, gentlemen, but absolute, untraceable liquidity. The final bid, now, is from Mr. Sterling at 20 million. Do I hear 21? The room was full of shadows, but Elias could count at least 20 men, all in tailored suits, all focused on the stage. He took in the layout. No clear line of sight to Vane from here without exposing himself entirely. The guards inside were less visible, placed discreetly in corners. Elias moved, staying low behind the heavy drapes lining the wall. He needed to get closer, past the first ring of tables. The auction was about to close. Tick-tock. Elias moved, staying low behind the heavy drapes lining the wall. He heard the faint scrape of a chair and froze. A man in a pale gray suit stood up, his voice gravelly. 21 million. Vane smiled, a practiced, predatory baring of teeth. 21 million. Sterling, the ball is back in your court. This is it. The moment of distraction. Elias moved past a stack of empty champagne bottles, using the shadow of a large pillar. He was 3 tables closer when he heard the faint snick of a security camera pivoting above the pillar. Damn it. Vane always upgraded the tech. He was directly in the line of a camera. He hadn't seen. He had less than a second before it would signal his presence. He couldn't shoot it. The noise would raise the alarm instantly. His hand shot out, not toward the camera itself, but toward the closest object. A heavy, half-full ice bucket, resting precariously on a linen-covered table. He yanked the cloth. The bucket, ice, and linen tablecloth went flying, not toward the camera, but right into the lap of the bidder in the pale gray suit. What in the hell? The bidder roared, leaping up, hands covered in melting ice water. The disturbance drew every eye in the room away from the stage, away from the shadows, and directly to the wet, furious bidder. Vane looked irritated, his eyes narrowed. The small moment of chaos was all Elias needed. He sprinted the final distance, a blur against the velvet and mahogany, reaching the heavy curtain directly stage left. He pressed his back against the wall, breathing hard, the Walther cold against his palm. He was now just 10 feet from Marcus Vane, separated only by a thick velvet curtain and the thin veneer of an auction. He heard Vane sigh into the microphone. Perhaps we should take a short intermission. Mr. Sterling, clean yourself up. No intermission, Vane. Elias pushed gently on the curtain, just enough to see the stage. Vane had turned his back to the audience, speaking to a nervous-looking man holding a gavel. The Walther came up. Then, a new voice, cold, feminine, and utterly unexpected, cut through the tense air from the far side of the stage. The man who ruined the Thorne family, who orchestrated a dock accident for the insurance payout, doesn't get to decide when the show is over, Marcus. Elias froze. He knew that voice. Impossible. Vane spun around, shocked. Security. A woman stepped out of the shadows behind the stage. She was dressed in an impeccable black suit, her hair pulled back sharply, and she held a thin, silver-handled switchblade, its polished steel reflecting the stage light. It was Lydia Thorne, Elias's older sister. She was supposed to be in Geneva. She was supposed to be safe. He was supposed to be in Geneva, and she was standing between Elias and his target, a ghost with a knife, her eyes burning with the same 10 years of hate he carried. Lydia. The name was a rasp, choked in Elias's throat, buried beneath the stage curtain. He gripped the Walther, suddenly unsure whether to rush Vane or his own sister. Her presence was a wrench thrown into 10 years of meticulous planning. Vane was faster to recover. His hand shot toward his ear, pressing a hidden comms piece. Security. Get this lunatic off my stage now? The 2 inner guards, positioned near the entrance, started to move, but they were delayed by the commotion surrounding the ice-soaked bidder. They had to weave through the mahogany tables. Lydia didn't flinch. She took a step toward Vane, the small blade catching the spotlight like a diamond. Don't bother, Marcus. Your rent-a-thugs are slow tonight. They always were. She knew his operation, knew its weaknesses. She hadn't been safe in Geneva. She'd been building a separate plan, a parallel act of vengeance. Vane took a stumbling step back, his composure finally cracking. Lydia, you should have stayed gone. This is foolish. He tried to project calm, but the sweat beaded on his forehead under the hot stage lights. He was trapped between her and the curtain, The only way off stage, a narrow set of stairs right where Elias was hiding. The bidders, a collection of the city's wealthiest vultures, were finally realizing this wasn't part of the show. Murmurs escalated into shouts. Lydia's voice cut through the noise, sharp and clear. Is this a robbery? Is this a robbery? Not a robbery. It's a foreclosure. She flicked her wrist. The switchblade was now pointed directly at the small, dark treasure chest. The relic Vane was selling for 21 million. This trinket isn't what you care about, is it? You care about what it represents. The last piece of liquidity you need to finalize the transfer of Thorne global shipping assets into your shell corporations. Elias realized her target wasn't Vane's life, but his business. His foundation. A calculated move, so much colder and more devastating than his own plan for a quick, bloody end. She was going for the systemic ruin. Vane's eyes flashed from the knife to the chest, then finally to the curtain where he sensed the other presence. He was smart. He knew the Thorne family ran deep. Leverage? Lydia laughed, a sound like glass breaking. I have the truth, Marcus. And now, I have your attention. With a sudden, swift movement, she slammed the butt of her blade handle down onto the pedestal next to the auction chest. The small, ornate box didn't just rattle. It tipped, and the latch, surprisingly delicate, sprang open. Inside, resting on faded velvet, wasn't gold or jewels. It was a single, folded piece of thick vellum paper. Vane roared, lunging forward with unexpected speed. He threw the velvet curtain aside. Stepping out of the shadows, the Walther leveled. He was not aiming at Vane, not yet. He aimed at the one thing that secured Vane's escape, the stage-left floodlight, a massive bulb designed to illuminate the auction. Crack. SSSSSSS. He aimed at the one thing that secured Vane's escape, the stage-left floodlight, a massive bulb designed to illuminate the auction. The bullet hit the wiring harness. The light exploded, not into darkness, but into blinding, high-voltage feedback and a shower of sparks. The sharp, metallic tang of ozone filled the air, mingled with the cigar smoke. Vane froze, his eyes now wide with genuine terror, not just at Lydia, but at the newcomer. He recognized the shape of the man, the cut of the jaw, and the old, familiar Walther. Thorne. Vane whispered the name like a curse. The boy. The two interior security guards, finally clear of the panicked bidders, had seen the weapon flash, and were raising their rifles. Elias didn't hesitate. He took 2 fast, precise steps downstage toward the stage stairs. Drawing fire away from Lydia, bang bang, 2 rounds slammed into the thick concrete wall. Just above the guards' heads, not to kill, but to dominate the space. The guards duck. Momentarily losing their nerve against the sudden close combat, Elias was playing on their complacency. They expected a high-tech heist, not a head-on old-school confrontation. Lydia took advantage of the chaos. She snatched the vellum paper from the open chest. Vane, seeing his documentation gone, lunged for her arm. She dodged his grab, agile despite the formal suit, and darted down the other side of the stage. She was heading toward the back exit, a fire escape Elias hadn't accounted for. Vane, enraged and cornered, abandoned his escape route and turned to face Elias. A sudden, desperate look in his eyes. You think this changes anything? You think that piece of paper matters? You think that piece of paper matters? Elias said, his voice flat, emotionless. It matters to your bankers. Elias said, his voice flat, emotionless. He still held the Walther steady, the heavy pistol a familiar extension of his will. One of the guards, Frank's partner from outside, now recovered, popped up from behind an overturned table, and managed to get a shot off. The bullet slammed into the pillar where Elias had been hiding only seconds ago. This is too messy. Elias needed Vane secured, not killed in a crossfire. He had 10 years of questions that couldn't be answered by a corpse. He fired a non-lethal round, a specialized rubber core load, at the advancing guard's shoulder. The man cried out, dropping his rifle, clutching his arm, effectively neutralized. Vane saw his moment. He had been backing up, inch by inch, until his heel hit a tripwire Elias hadn't seen, a small, dark cable running along the back perimeter of the stage. Vane didn't fall. Instead, the tripwire activated something else. With a grinding swoosh of hydraulics, a section of the floor, right behind Vane's current position, slid open. It wasn't a hole. It was an entrance to a hidden elevator. Vane scrambled backward and dove into the dark opening, disappearing instantly. He has a panic room. Beneath the stage. Beneath the stage. Beneath the stage. Elias cursed under his breath, turning his attention to the warehouse around him. The remaining security guards, now disorganized, were unsure whether to pursue the disappearing boss or the armed man on stage. Lydia was gone, too. The back door, the fire escape, stood ajar, flapping slightly in the rush of air. Elias ran to the stage-right exit where she had vanished, pausing only to retrieve the small, ornate chest from the pedestal. Empty, but important, he felt. It was a lure. He grabbed the last active guard's discarded rifle for leverage and sprinted out the door. He emerged onto a rickety metal fire escape, overlooking a narrow alleyway choked with garbage bins. Down below, he saw her, a silhouette sprinting toward the mouth of the alley. He stopped at a sleek, custom-built black sedan, its engine already humming, its driver's side door open. She paused, looking back up at him. The stage lights bleeding around the side of the warehouse caught the fierce intensity in her eyes. She held up the vellum paper like a flag. You wanted the end. I want the unraveling. You kill him, he's a martyr. I take this. And he's just a bankrupt thief. She slipped into the sedan. Before Elias could even clear the third step, the car shot out of the alley like a bullet, tires squealing a brief protest against the damp asphalt. Elias was left alone on the fire escape, breathing in the cold, oily night air, holding a stolen rifle and an empty wooden box. The chase was still on, but now the target was splintered. He had Vane's scent, but now he also had his sister's cryptic warning and the knowledge that she held the key to the Empire's destruction. The Thorne revenge was now a dual operation, and he wasn't sure if they were allies or rivals in the dark. The cold metal of the rifle was heavy and alien in Elias's hand. He descended the fire escape quickly, his mind already calculating the next moves, mapping the intersection of his plan and Lydia's bombshell intervention. She had called the paper the key to Vane's unraveling. She wasn't seeking the clean cut of murder. She was after the slow burn of corporate collapse. He reached the alley floor. The black sedan's tire marks were fresh on the damp concrete. He checked the small, empty treasure chest he'd pocketed, running his thumb over the intricate, tarnished brass latch. Why risk the commotion for an empty box? It didn't make sense. Vane was selling the provenance, the story, not the contents. Lydia had taken the only real treasure, the document. A sudden, sharp beam of light speared the alley, followed by the grinding sound of a diesel engine. One of the security vehicles, a matte black SUV, had reversed out of the main parking area and was now blocking the alley's mouth, its high beams effectively blinding Elias. Showtime's over, Thorne. A voice bellowed from behind the blinding light. Elias dropped into a crouch behind a dumpster. He knew the rifle was too loud, too cumbersome for this kind of close-quarters fight. 3 figures emerged, 2 taking point, the third, the driver, staying by the open door, rifle across his chest. They were closing fast, spreading out, using the shadows thrown by the headlights to their advantage. Elias had seconds. He couldn't go back into the warehouse. The main force would be mobilizing inside. He needed to disappear into the city grid. He aimed not at the men, but at the rear tire of the SUV. Pop. The sound was muffled by the alley walls, more like a heavy sigh than a gunshot, thanks to the custom suppressor. The lead guard immediately stopped, hearing the strange sound but misidentifying its source. Elias fired twice more, fast and low, aiming for the engine block. One shot hit the alternator housing, the other, the radiator. The SUV hissed, its engine sputtering as a thick plume of steam erupted from beneath the hood. Suddenly, the alley was plunged into near-total darkness, illuminated only by the faint, distant glow of street lamps. The guards were disoriented, their tactical advantage reversed. He's near the dumpster. Spread out. The lead guard yelled, his voice sounding hollow and uncertain. In the sudden darkness, he landed silently. On the other side, he ran toward the nearest cluster of steel boxes, weaving between them. The rounds were poorly aimed, hitting metal and concrete. They were shooting at the sound, not the target. He found a container stack, 3 high, labeled for transport to Shanghai, and started climbing. The metal was cold and slick with harbor condensation. But Elias's training was visceral, muscle memory honed over years on ship rigging. He scaled the rivets and ladder rungs with the speed of a cat. From the top of the stack, 15 feet up, the pier was laid out beneath him like a war map. He could see the flash of other vehicles arriving. More of Vane's security detail, their black SUVs converging on Pier 14. They were sealing off the dock. In the distance, across the vast harbor, the lights of the financial district glittered, a $1 million view he'd hated for 10 years. It was in one of those glass towers, he knew, that Marcus Vane was now hiding. Descending into his secure subterranean bolt hole, Elias pulled out his phone, a burner secured with layers of encryption, and typed a quick, cryptic message to a contact known only as the broker. Vane secured key. Locate Thorne, Geneva. He needed to know what Lydia had. And he needed to know why she hadn't contacted him in 10 years, only to appear now, a spectral partner in his retribution. As he watched the organized search effort begin below, guards methodically moving between container rows, he noticed something small and out of place sticking to the side of the container directly beneath his feet. It was a single, stylized raven feather, black as pitch, stuck to the yellow paint with a thin smear of something waxy. Elias froze. The raven was Alexander Kroll's signature. The broker. He checked the phone. No immediate reply. But the feather meant the broker had been here. Recently. Kroll was a ghost in the world of high-stakes information warfare. The one man who could crack Vane's financial fortress from the outside. But Kroll didn't leave calling cards unless he was trying to send a specific message, one that might point Elias toward the next move, or perhaps a trap. Elias examined the feather more closely in the weak ambient light. It wasn't just stuck there. It was pointing toward the north end of the pier, toward the old, derelict fish market, a structure long abandoned and rumored to be a nexus for illicit trade. If Kroll was here, and if he left a trail, then he was offering guidance. But why the theatrics? And why now, concurrent with Lydia's reappearance? Elias quickly descended the container stack, his movements precise, avoiding any unnecessary noise. He moved toward the north end, keeping low, letting the noise and chaos of Vane's search team wash over the central pier. The abandoned fish market was a skeletal ruin of rusted steel and broken concrete, smelling strongly of old fish guts and mold. It offered cover, but it was also a labyrinth of blind corners. He slipped inside the main processing hall. The floor was slick with sludge and rainwater. The only light came from the massive holes in the roof, casting strange, elongated shadows. Elias. The voice was low, devoid of inflection, a sound carved from granite. Kroll, you're losing your subtlety. A figure stepped out of the deepest shadow. Tall, lean, dressed in expensive, practical field gear that made him look less like a broker and more like a predator. This was Kroll. The raven feather in his lapel was his only eccentricity. Subtlety is for diplomats, Thorne. You just blew up a high-value auction and drew the attention of Vane's entire private security force. Subtlety is dead, and your sister is 2 steps ahead of your revenge. Where is she? And what did she take? Elias demanded, skipping the pleasantries. Kroll didn't answer immediately. He gestured toward a rusted metal table. On it lay a stack of glossy, high-resolution photographs. Lydia took the ledger, the final accounting of the transfer of assets. The proof of money laundering and fraud necessary to sink Vane's empire in court, not in a morgue. A much slower, more painful death. She's already on the move to rendezvous with a solicitor in the city center. She played the long game. You were the brilliant, distracting chaos. Elias looked at the photos. They weren't of Vane or Lydia. They were highly magnified shots of the Walther PPK he was holding. The one he thought was his father's. The one he thought was his father's. Kroll continued, his voice dropping slightly. A trace element analysis of the metal. Vane didn't just stage the accident, Elias. He had a cleaner. Elias felt a cold dread seize his chest. He looked at the familiar, deadly weight of the pistol in his hand, the last thing he had of his father. Kroll pointed to the table. Look at the 5th image. The firing pin data. Elias squinted at the photo. The microscopic scratches on the firing pin were unique, a ballistic fingerprint. Kroll had cross-referenced it. The one you are holding, the one your father supposedly carried, was used to fire the final, non-fatal shot that severed the control cable on the crane moments before it collapsed. The shot that ensured the accident looked convincing, and that your father couldn't escape. Elias lowered the gun, his hand trembling, not from fear, but from a deeper, colder shock. The ultimate betrayal. The instrument of his revenge was stained with his father's blood, a relic weaponized against him. Who? The one who knew your father's preferences intimately. The one who had access to this weapon before you took it from the safe. Vane didn't pull the trigger on the crane, Elias. Someone close to you did. Someone you trusted. The one who needed Vane's money and access. Someone close to you did. The instrument of his revenge was stained with his father's blood. It was a recent surveillance image, taken only hours ago, of a rendezvous in a shadowed parking garage. It showed a man receiving a heavy briefcase from a hidden figure. The hidden figure was Marcus Vane's most trusted second-in-command, Silas Reed. The man receiving the briefcase, the man who had been Vane's inside operative, the man who had the access, the motive, and the opportunity to use the specific Walther PPK, was Elias's former mentor and his father's longtime business partner, Simon Vance. The image of Simon Vance receiving the briefcase, the cold, damning proof of his treachery, hit Elias like a physical blow. Not the crane, not Vane, but Simon. The man who taught him how to tie a proper knot, how to read a bill of lading, how to trust a handshake. The man who had wept openly at his father's funeral. Elias stared at the photo. The fluorescent lighting of the decaying fish market casting harsh, sickly reflections on the glossy print. The Walther in his hand now felt toxic, a lead weight burning his palm. Why Kroll? Elias's voice was barely a whisper. Why Simon? He was family. Alexander Kroll watched him, his expression unchanging. Family is the first casualty in high finance, Elias. Vane gave him what your father never would, total control. Simon was the inside man. He fed Vane the schematics, ensured the crane's fail-safes were deactivated, and, most importantly, made sure your father's favorite gun was the cleanup tool. It provided Vane with perfect leverage over Simon, cementing his silence with shared guilt. Kroll tapped the image of the briefcase exchange. This is not about the past, though. This is about the future. Vane and Simon met tonight after the auction was shut down. Simon took the briefcase. It contains the contingency plan, the Phoenix Protocol. If Vane is taken down by Lydia's ledger, Simon is next in line to salvage the remnants of the Thorne and Vane assets, a neat transition with no trail. Elias looked up, the shock slowly giving way to a white-hot, focused rage far sharper than the hatred he'd felt for Vane. Vane was a monster, but Simon was a viper. Lydia has the ledger to sink Vane, Elias stated, his mind beginning to race, piecing together the splintered operation. Simon has the contingency plan to keep Vane's empire alive. If I move on Simon now, Vane is free to recover. Precisely. And Vane, who is currently sealed in his subterranean vault, has no idea you know about Simon. He believes Simon is his safety net. Your goal shifts now. You must take the Phoenix Protocol from Simon, and then you must deliver Simon to Lydia. Where is he now? Simon's bolt hole is a secure penthouse at the top of the Onyx Tower, downtown. The briefcase contains hard drives, encrypted keys, and the signed documents that transfer the residual assets. If she files that ledger, Vane's empire is on ice by morning. If you bring her the Phoenix Protocol by then, she can use it to completely nullify Vane's entire contingency and implicate Simon in the grand fraud. Elias looked at his watch, 12:45 a.m. He had barely an hour and 15 minutes to infiltrate one of the most secure residential towers in the city, neutralize his former mentor, and get across the city to the courthouse. It was impossible, which meant it was the only way. You're not doing this out of the goodness of your heart, Kroll. He wasn't giving Kroll the satisfaction of seeing him discard it. Not yet. What do you want? I want the old Thorne Global Shipping Yards. The derelict ones south of the bridge. Vane's been sitting on them for 2 years. They have value. Hand me the coordinates and the necessary sign-off after the dust settles. And I will continue to feed you intel until the last enemy is buried. It was a cold, efficient deal. Real estate for retribution. Done, Elias agreed. Kroll reached into his own expensive field jacket and pulled out a small, flat device, a highly specialized sub-frequency interceptor. This will piggyback on the Onyx Tower's keyless entry system. You have 10 minutes from activation before the signal is scrubbed. After that, you're locked in or out. Elias took the device. The weight of the device was minimal, but the weight of the task was immense. I need a clear way out. I've handled that. A repurposed drone. It just made a high-speed pass over Vane's convoy entering the main dock road, dropping a dozen flashbangs and a smoke canister that mimics a major oil fire. Your exit is clear. Head for the old rail line 2 blocks east of here. There's a cargo express that leaves every half hour, stopping close to the Onyx Tower's service entrance. Elias nodded, grabbing the rifle he'd tossed earlier in the alley, knowing he'd need the firepower for the tower. The fish market is a dead end. Vane will know I spoke to someone. He'll know I was here. Let him, Kroll said, already fading back into the deep shadows near the loading dock. The man who thinks he's safe is the one you can control. The man who thinks you're going for his life won't protect his assets. Go for the assets, Elias. You have an hour and 15 minutes. Don't be late for court. Elias turned and ran, bursting out of the decrepit building and toward the distant, rhythmic rumble of the cargo train. The chaotic screams of Vane's guards, now focused on a phantom oil fire at the port entrance, echoed behind him. He reached the rail line just as the massive, slow-moving train began to pull past. The black cars were scarred and graffitied. Elias sprinted alongside, finding an empty boxcar with a slightly ajar door. He tossed the rifle in, then grabbed the heavy metal edge and hauled himself inside. The sudden shift to the rhythmic, hypnotic clack-clack of the train wheels was a contrast to the frantic chaos of the docks. He sat down hard on the cold, splintered floor, gripping the sub-frequency interceptor. He pulled the Walther out and held it up to the dim light filtering through the door cracks. Simon. The betrayal was an acid in his gut. He had to get to the Onyx Tower. He had to stop Simon Vance from preserving Vane's legacy. And he had to do it using the very knowledge and skill Simon himself had taught him. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. He was going to use Simon's playbook to dismantle the entire game. He checked the map on the burner phone. The Onyx Tower was 22 stories of polished marble and secured access, and he was getting on through the service entrance. He had to assume Simon, knowing the port had just gone sideways, would be guarded and hypervigilant. Elias closed his eyes for a brief moment, breathing in the stale air of the freight car. He didn't see Vane's face anymore. He saw Simon Vance's smiling eyes, the false warmth of a traitor. The reckoning just got personal again. But this time, it was tactical, a scalpel instead of a hammer. And the clock was ticking down to 2 a.m. The cargo express train screeched to a halt with a shuddering jolt, the steel wheels protesting against the tracks. Elias shoved the Walther into his belt and grabbed the rifle, sliding the boxcar door open, just enough to confirm his location. They were deep in the city's industrial heart, a maze of low-slung warehouses and service tunnels beneath. The looming glass towers. The Onyx Tower, Simon Vance's sanctuary, pierced the night sky 2 blocks away, a dark spire of wealth and secrecy. He dropped silently to the ballast, the rifle held close. The air here was cleaner, colder, smelling less of brine and more of exhaust and ozone. He checked Kroll's sub-frequency interceptor, a slim, matte black rectangle. The clock read 1:05 a.m. He moved quickly through the service alleyways, avoiding the brightly lit main streets. Simon wouldn't be counting on elegance. He'd be counting on layered security. The Onyx was known for its biometric scanners and pressurized entry systems, far beyond simple keycards. Kroll's device was the only way past the first layer. The service entrance of the Onyx Tower was exactly as expected, an unassuming, reinforced steel door next to a garbage compactor, flanked by 2 pin-drop cameras and a faint green light indicating an active retinal scan. Elias ducked into the shadow of a parked catering van and activated the interceptor. A thin, high-frequency whine emanated from the device, barely audible. On the steel door, the green light flickered erratically, turning amber, then red, then back to green, before finally settling on a steady, solid blue. 10 minutes. Elias moved to the door and gave it a soft push. It slid open with a whisper of hydraulics. He stepped inside a sterile, cold hallway leading to the service elevator core. No immediate alarms, no flashing lights. The keyless entry system had been successfully bridged. He took the elevator marked staff only, riding it up 21 silent stories. He had no illusions. The interceptor only worked on the ground floor system. The elevator opened onto a small, empty staging area on the 21st floor. Elias checked the building schematics he'd memorized from an old architectural file. Simon's penthouse was the only unit on the 22nd floor, accessible only by a private staircase and a separate, more robust security door at the end of this hallway. This door was thicker, marked with high-definition cameras and a small, humming box that was definitely a military-grade acoustic sensor. It wasn't just checking for voices, it was listening for the impact of footsteps, the click of metal. Elias had to go silent. He shrugged off the heavy rifle and wrapped it tightly in his leather jacket, using the padding to muffle the sound of the moving parts. He took off his boots, leaving him in thick wool socks. He held the weapon jacket bundle close and started the ascent. The 20 steps to the 22nd floor were the longest 20 steps of his life. Each step was a measured transfer of weight, using the ball of his foot, pressing against the riser, not the tread, to minimize vibration. Simon taught me this, he thought bitterly. How to move like a ghost in a hostile environment. He reached the top landing. The air was pressurized here, scented faintly with expensive cedar and fine brandy, Simon's scent. The final barrier was a heavy, blast-proof door, unmarked except for a small, dark lens indicating a pressure-sensitive thermal scan. It was designed to detect a human presence that wasn't Simon and locked down completely. Elias pulled out a small, specialized ceramic charge from his pack, a clean, thermal-neutral explosive used for breaching vaults without triggering heat alarms. He applied it meticulously around the door's locking mechanism. He had less than 2 minutes. Less than 2 minutes remaining on the Kroll device's window. He stepped back, pressing the micro-detonator. The resulting sound was a heavy, dead thump localized entirely to the door mechanism. The charge had vaporized the locking bolts without generating enough heat to trip the thermal array. The door clunked inward a fraction. Elias pushed it open. Rifle ready. The penthouse was a symphony of dark glass and chrome overlooking the glittering expanse of the sleeping city. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 360-degree panorama. Simon Vance was sitting at a massive, polished concrete desk in the center of the room. He wasn't surprised. He was waiting. He wore a smoking jacket over silk pajamas, and a glass of amber liquid sat next to his elbow. On the desk, illuminated by a single, adjustable desk lamp, was the briefcase, small, metallic, and locked. "Elias," Simon said, his voice smooth, completely devoid of fear. "You're late. I expected you 20 minutes ago. I even told security to stand down when the elevator passed the 10th floor. No need to alarm the neighbors." Elias stepped into the light, letting the rifle drop to the ground with a soft thud. He didn't need it. This was between them. "You knew I was coming." "Of course, I knew," Simon replied, taking a slow sip of his drink. "You're your father's son. Predictable, honorable, and obsessed with the theatrical. I assumed you'd come for the death blow, just as I planned for Marcus to do. Only you're after the paperwork, thanks to that clever sister of yours. You set him up." "You set him up," Elias stated, the words tasting like ash. "You gave Vane the gun. You cut the line. You killed the only man who ever truly trusted you." Simon sighed, a paternal, disappointed sound. "Your father was a sentimental fool, Elias. He was loyal to a name. I was loyal to progress. Vane offered the future. Your father kept Thorne Global mired in old shipping contracts and loyalty bonuses. He was weak. I was merely pruning the dead wood. The crane didn't kill him, Simon. The fall put him in the water. Your bullet ensured he couldn't move when the tide came in." Simon's eyes didn't waver. It was efficient, a final certainty. "And now you're here for the briefcase, to give Lydia the tools to end my partnership with Marcus. You really think you can stop us?" He reached slowly, deliberately, for the briefcase. "It's a shame. You were always the smarter one, Elias. But you lack my lack of conscience. Get your hand away from the case," Elias commanded, his voice low and tight. "Or what? You'll shoot me? In my own penthouse? With the gun I used to clean up the last mess? Come now? That's sloppy, even for your emotional vengeance act." Simon's face held a taunting smirk. Elias stopped 3 feet from the desk. He pulled the Walther PPK from his belt. Instead of pointing it at Simon, he reversed it, offering the butt of the pistol to his former mentor. "I won't shoot you, Simon. I won't let your death be as clean and quick as you made my father's. This gun is evidence. I'm delivering the killer, not a corpse. Simon's smirk faltered, replaced by a flash of genuine fear. He had anticipated rage, a fight, a murder, not cold, calculating custody. Lydia is waiting. She gets the ledger and the Phoenix Protocol. You get the district attorney's office, the evidence, and a life sentence to think about sentimentality. Simon lunged, not for the offered pistol, but for a hidden panic button beneath the desk. Elias was faster. He slapped the briefcase away with the back of his free hand. It clattered to the marble floor. He used the skill Simon had taught him 2 decades ago, a lightning-fast, disarming wrist lock that snapped Simon's arm up behind his back. Simon cried out, the pain a high-pitched squeal in the silent room. Elias slammed him down onto the desk, pinning him across the concrete slab. It's over, Simon, Elias grated out, pressing his knee into Simon's spine. Simon struggled weakly, his face contorted. He won't stop, Elias. Marcus has contingency upon contingency. This is just a distraction. Elias ignored him, grabbing the metallic briefcase and finding the small, complex lock. He glanced at the clock on the desktop, 1:40 a.m. 20 minutes. He found the lock, but before he could even try the combination, a new sound cut through the room. The whir of a private elevator arriving at the floor below. That's not security, Elias. Simon gasped, straining against the weight on his back. That's Marcus. He didn't take the vault. He was running a deep fake to cover his real exit. He's coming for the Phoenix Protocol himself. The rhythmic whir of the descending elevator wasn't a signal of safety. It was the sound of a closing trap. Marcus Vane hadn't sealed himself in the vault. That had been a magnificent, final deception to scatter the search. And buy him time to retrieve the actual leverage. Simon's contingency wasn't Vane's safety net. It was Vane's ultimate weapon. Elias shoved the Walther into Simon's exposed ribcage, twisting the arm lock a fraction harder. Vane is coming. What's the code for the case, Simon? Now. Simon, white-faced from the pain and terror of facing his buyer, stammered. 747. The old Thorne family jet number. Elias released the pressure long enough to slam the case against the desk and punch in the code. Click. The lid sprang open, revealing not hard drives, but a thick sheaf of paper, legal transfer documents, and a small, military-grade satellite phone. The Phoenix Protocol wasn't just paper, it was a line of communication. It's a trigger, Elias. Simon cried, panic overriding loyalty. Vane is going to activate the transfer as soon as he leaves. It bypasses Lydia's ledger. The elevator doors began to slide open, revealing Vane. He looked wild, his tailored suit rumpled, sweat drying on his brow. He wasn't armed, but his eyes were fixed on the open briefcase. Vane lunged forward, not for Elias, but for Simon, a furious, betrayed buyer. Elias had microseconds. He couldn't fight Vane and restrain Simon while holding the phone and the documents. He had to end the cycle immediately. He seized the open briefcase, documents and satellite phone still inside, and hurled it with all his strength, not at Vane, but toward the massive floor-to-ceiling window behind Simon's desk. The metallic case hit the reinforced glass with a deafening, crystalline crash. The massive window pane didn't shatter into pieces, but spiderwebbed instantly, stress lines radiating from the impact point. The resulting suction was immediate, a rush of high-altitude wind tearing into the penthouse. Vane halted, distracted by the sudden, terrifying exposure to the 22nd-story drop. Elias used the moment. He seized Simon by the front of his silk jacket and dragged him, kicking and screaming, toward the shattered window. You wanted progress, Simon? Go tell my father. He threw Simon Vance, not out the window, but into the massive, cracked spiderweb of glass. Simon's body slammed into the stress point, his weight and momentum enough to breach the remainder of the reinforced pane, with a monstrous, shearing sound. And the glass gave way, and Simon vanished into the cold, windy night. Vane screamed, a high-pitched, primal sound of horror and disbelief. Seeing his safety net, his partner in crime, plummet 20 stories. Plummet 20 stories to the avenue below. He took a stumbling step back, his eyes fixed on the empty, gaping space where the window had been. Elias didn't pause. He spun toward Vane, the Walther finally leveled, a steady, unwavering line. From his hand to Vane's chest. The air was full of the roar of the wind, the faint wail of distant city sirens, and the sound of Vane's ragged breathing. The accident was a live Vane. Vane, cornered, defeated, and truly terrified, raised his hands. Wait, we can still make a deal. The money, I'll give it all back. The company, I'll sign it back over. The company belongs to the grave you dug. But before he could pull it, the satellite phone inside the splintered briefcase on the floor began to emit a sudden, rapid series of high-pitched beeps, the transfer activation signal. The Phoenix protocol wasn't Simon's. It was Vane's final, hidden trigger. The transfer was starting now. Elias changed trajectory instantly. He lowered the Walther, sprinted to the shattered window, and snatched the satellite phone from the briefcase. He didn't waste time looking for an off switch. He threw the phone as hard as he could. The phone tumbled, the transmission signal scrambling, as it fell out of range and smashed into the concrete of the street below, cutting the activation short. The immediate threat was neutralized. The Empire was frozen, the assets untransferable, the ledgers still viable. The revenge was complete. Elias turned back to Vane. Marcus Vane was still standing there, hands raised, his eyes flicking between the empty phone in the air and the gun in Elias's hand. But there was no fear left, only a bitter, nihilistic acceptance. Go on, then. Finish it. Do what you came here for, Thorne. Elias looked at the man who had stolen his life. He looked at the gun in his hand, the one that had killed his father. He looked at the gaping hole in the window, where Simon's body had just passed. He had 10 years of rage built up, a hunger for this final, bloody moment. He lowered the gun completely. The weight of the revenge, the 10 years of dark commitment, suddenly evaporated, replaced by a hollow, profound emptiness. I won't give you the clean ending, Vane. He stripped the magazine from the Walther and tossed the pistol onto the concrete desk, right next to Vane's abandoned glass of brandy. That's a longer death than a bullet. Elias turned his back on Vane, walking away from the penthouse, leaving the architect of his suffering alive, but utterly ruined. He retrieved the rifle he had left by the stairs and descended quickly. He emerged from the Onyx Tower service entrance just after 1:55 a.m., disappearing into the pre-dawn shadows. 20 minutes later, he met Lydia on the steps of the federal courthouse. She was pale, holding the Vane ledger tightly. Lydia was pale, holding the Vane ledger tightly. He was pale, holding the Vane ledger tightly. Elias said, handing her the heavy sheaf of Phoenix protocol documents he'd salvaged from the floor. Simon Vance is dead. Vane is free to fall. Vane is free to fall. Vane is free to rise. This is the proof we needed to lock the assets down. Lydia looked at the documents, then at the empty space behind his eyes. She took the papers, a slow, single tear tracing a line down her cheek. She took the papers, a slow, single tear tracing a line down her cheek. It's done. Our father is finally avenged. It's over. Lydia turned, walking up the courthouse steps, her black suit disappearing into the stone facade, a ghost returning the stolen balance to the scales. Elias walked away from the courthouse, not toward the docks, or a train, or an escape route, but toward the dawn rising over the city he had just purged. He was empty, but he was free. The shadow was lifted. The long game of revenge had claimed its final price, 10 years of his life, and the last shred of his humanity. Now, he had to figure out how to live in the light again.